morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alex Paul from InvestorStream, and I'll be your host today. Today we have Carbonxt Group Limited Managing Director Warren Murphy, who's going to provide an update on the company's current operations and recent developments. Now, joining Warren will be Director of Technology, Dr. David Mazyck, and Chief Operating Officer, Dr. Regina Rodriguez, for a short presentation on this progress, followed by a Q&A session. Please feel free to send in your questions via the chat platform, in the question pane in the GoToWebinar control panel, or simply email them to me at alex@investorstream.com.au. A copy of the webinar will also be available on Carbonxt's website and social media platforms later today, but for now I'd like to throw it over to Warren to kick things off for us. Warren, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks everyone for joining us. The main objective today is not to listen to me, but to listen to my far more intelligent and charismatic colleagues, David Mazyck and Regina Rodriguez. We do want to just touch on a few things that investors have been asking us to deal with and bring up, particularly around the desire for us to do this Kentucky deal, what it brings to the company, and why we are, single-handedly focused on that at this point in time. We are happy to say that based on the recent change to the funding structure and better expected capital raise, we are pretty well funded for this deal now, even with a decent amount of contingency. But that isn't going to be the real focus today. The real focus is going to be on our intellectual property and why we are doing the things that we're doing, both from a holistic sense as well as from an economic sense. And on that note, I'll hand over to David and Regina to move on.
Great. Thank you very much, Warren. And thank you all for taking the time this morning to listen to some updates that Regina and I will walk through. We've got a series of slides. On our second slide, we have a brief agenda that we're going to review, brief summary, some of the highlights for Regina and I in our careers. We'll walk through a market overview as well as some opportunity, a little bit of detail on why this Kentucky JV is an opportunistic opportunity for Carbonxt, our R&D capability, some things that we've been working on, and then we'll conclude with some questions and answers. On our next slide, I'll start with my introduction and then turn it over to Regina. Very briefly, my PhD work has been in activated carbon. I've been involved in consulting for activated carbon manufacturers throughout the world. Been fortunate enough to have an opportunity to engage in some entrepreneurial activities. As I've noted here, I started Engineering Performance Solutions, which is a US-based company that helps water utilities throughout the US with the selection of activated carbons. In addition, prior to Carbonxt, I owned and operated a facility known as Acticarb. It produced 10,000 tons per year of powdered activated carbon that was flipped over to Dow Carbons US. And I've been engaged in a lot of research, including activated carbon and other products, particularly doing quite a bit of work for NASA, Advanced Life Support International Space Station. I was fortunate enough to be one of 5 selected by the World Coal Association to work with the United Nations on the Minamata Treaty, their global treaty on mercury. For 10 years, I served as the chairperson for the American Water Works Association Activated Carbon Standards Committee. I am now very fortunate to be one that is of about 8, who is an American Water Works Association Water Sciences Division trustee, and I've done a number of patents. Myself and Regina today have highlighted a number of aspects pertaining to water because this is the market that is about to significantly experience widespread growth in the US, Europe, and for the whole world for that matter. And before we talk about some of that opportunity, I'll turn it over to Regina to provide an introduction of her background.
Yeah, thank you, David. Like David mentioned, Regina Rodriguez, I was fortunate enough to meet David way back in my undergrad, where I was fortunate enough to join Carbonxt probably about 12 years ago as a researcher and conducting my undergraduate research. And that really prompted my research into activated carbon, which I later pursued as a PhD student at the University of Florida. I specifically focused on mercury capture, which was very aligned with the focus of Carbonxt at that time for mercury purification in the air side, and was able to do that nicely as I transitioned from my undergraduate studies into my role at Carbonxt, where I've held various opportunities to not only do research, develop new products and technology, but then also be able to work very closely with air pollution control and coal-fired power plants throughout the past 12 years. I currently sit as the chairperson for the American Waterworks Activated Carbon Standards Committee. This is something that regulates all of the use of activated carbon for the water treatment side in the United States and Canada. And we surround ourselves with various manufacturers, but mostly users of activated carbon, alongside with researchers conducting state-of-the-art work, cutting-edge work on all new emerging contaminants. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those projects that we're leading through the company and trying to look at the various stages from research all the way to commercialization.
Thanks, Regina. And as we go to the next slide, I'll just add a little bit for those attending this morning that in this Activated Carbon Standards Committee, it has representation from academia, consulting firms, those who are assisting end users with their needs to meet water quality demands, water treatment plants, as well as the US EPA. And it's in these roles that Regina and I are looked at upon as the authorities across the entire North American continent to guide all of those constituents with how to apply activated carbon, which ones to choose, and how to best meet their treatment needs. Here on this particular slide, we have addressable markets and opportunities. As you all know, Carbonxt first set out to commercialize an extremely novel powdered activated carbon for mercury capture. Unlike the competitors that added bromine to their carbons to enhance performance, causing a variety of corrosion problems, we went with a non-halogenated approach. Powdered carbon is used both in the air phase as well as the liquid phase markets. By no means was this the intent to be the end goal for the company, but rather it was an opportunity that had reasonable entries to market and a growing market with the mercury legislation in the US, and therefore it made sense for that to be our first step. When we could, and after we were confident in our capabilities of producing pellets for a utility in Wisconsin, we then wanted to expand that facility and its capabilities to further advance our air phase pellet opportunities. And so you may have heard us refer to as CTC. That's basically just a descriptor of a certain type of product. So we have expanded that facility to not only produce for the WPS facility, but also into this other air phase markets. These air phase markets are, for example, capturing odors, or as well as what we call volatile organic compounds. These have similar in odor, but they're also bad for your health. Presently, we're not able to expand into the liquid phase market. We have essentially no more capacity at our facility. Similarly, the technology that we've developed, which by the way is very unique, it is patented by us, and therefore we have the exclusive rights to it. We're the only ones in the world that make pellets this way, which have a lot of advantages, which our customers like, but we're not able to use that same technology easily to go into the liquids phase market, and we don't have any means to go into the granular activated carbon market. And our desire is to be able to pursue all of these. And you can see in the bottom here, the full addressable opportunity product line would be powdered carbons, activated carbon pellets for the air phase, activated carbon pellets for the liquid phase, and then finally granular activated carbon. Next slide, please. Regina?
All right. So yeah, as David mentioned, with respect to why this liquid phase opportunity now, the very most important emerging contaminants that we look at from the water treatment side here over the past couple of years has been per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, what some would refer as PFAS, PFOS, and these are long-lasting chemicals and components which break down very, very slowly over time. And about 99.9% of the entire population in the world is known to have at least some percentage or some concentration of these chemicals in their bloodstream. As it is today, these constituents can be very harmful not only to humans but also animals and wildlife. And the United States is taking a very preemptive approach to the lifetime health advisory for these specific constituents. Here over the next couple of years, we will see utilities, water utilities and treatments to be able to start to meet new legislation to reduce those PFOS and PFAS constituents down to parts per trillion, PPT levels, to prevent further ingestion by humans throughout their food or throughout the water and food chain, which is a pretty important piece. Now, most of these PFAS constituents reside in the water, and that's how they move from location to location, and therefore having a pellet that is what we would call liquid stable, liquid application product will be a pretty significant piece to enter this market. Next slide. The PFAS are also known as forever chemicals, as some of you may have heard, and really we see these over the past couple of decades. They've been used by chemical manufacturers to make water-resistant clothing and really cleaning supplies. You'll see them in your non-stick cookware, but they have really taken a lot of harm to the environment, and the national primary drinking water regulations for these compounds is expected to be finalized next year here in the United States, with the enforcement being 2024 through 2028. So we are really at the cusp and at the front end of being able to target some of these applications that we may have not been able to target in the past from a market perspective, but also more specifically from when I joined Carbonxt back 12 years ago, my big position was how can we help mankind and humanity and be able to solve problems with great products that will be able to do that, not only to make an impact today, but in our future of our children and grandchildren. I think this piece does provide a pretty significant solution for not only here in the United States, but I very much envision this being a worldwide problem. I'll kick it back to you, David.
Yeah, thanks, Regina. And just maybe to help level set the audience a little bit on these PFOA, PFAS compounds, because they have relatively long names and they're complicated. But I think everybody can relate to, you know, our kitchenware, for example, or our raincoats. And when it rains, we just see that water beat up and it keeps us dry. Well, it is these PFOA, PFAS compounds that are responsible for that water beating on those raincoats. It's helping those nonstick pans work so well. The problem is we can appreciate, and it's a shame that it took so long for this to be realized, is that this chemical has been used globally. And it does tend to rinse off of these these devices. So our non-stick cookware loses that capability with time. Our raincoat tends to repel water less with time, and hence this is why this is such a global problem that we are now faced with. And so while there'll be attempts to remove these compounds from manufacturing in the future, they're already in all of our waters that we're drinking, unfortunately, on an everyday basis. And if you get a chance just to watch a little bit of television throughout the day, particularly pay attention if you see a commercial for something like nonstick cookware, because you'll start to see now that they're advertising PFOA, PFAS free, recognizing that indeed this is a really big problem. But again, unfortunately, the contamination, the damage has already been done. And so now we'll start looking to activated carbon as that primary technology to make sure that we're not drinking this in our water on an everyday basis like we've been. Next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about Kentucky, and this is a photograph of the Inez waste to energy facility that is located in the southeastern corner of the state. So as I mentioned previously, our facilities are not able to support the growth into activated carbon pellets, and presently we do not have the means to make granular activated carbon, which is often known as GAC. So therefore, what are the best ways that we can come to this market opportunity? As Regina has mentioned herself, myself, our entire team are very passionate, not just about activated carbon, but about protecting human health. And therefore, how can we use our technology? How can we use our passion? How can we use our knowledge base to best address this opportunity? And that's to be able to start producing granular activated carbon and activated carbon pellets. Why Kentucky? Why this particular site? Well, in addition to just solving the problem, we want to be able to do so in the greenest fashion possible. And therefore, this site creates more electricity than what we would need to power an entire 20,000 ton per year facility. In addition to having this very green fingerprint, it would also allow us to have low cost of production and therefore be able to go into the market and be able to compete with the other granular activated carbon providers with a very similar cost structure, therefore having us an easier entry to market. So the JV provides us three key things: increased production capacity for activated carbon pellets. That's going to be the primary product. We will also make some GAC, but we really want to focus on pellets. In working with some water utilities presently, there are a lot of advantages to pellets, and therefore that we want that to be our primary product. We have control over our input costs, which is extremely important, particularly when we want to be a competitor to others in this space. And then we have extremely high quality raw materials. And as we've already mentioned, this is the best way for us to move into the water treatment market. Next slide, please. So looking at this particular opportunity, we're expecting any day now that the EPA will be finalizing some recommendations to the marketplace on their studies they've been doing over the past couple of years. What will they be finalizing? Well, they'll be, for example, getting guidelines to how activated carbon can be used to meet this particular opportunity. There are different techniques that the water utilities need some help with. They'll be talking about their 4 part per trillion goal, that how that was chosen, what it was based on, and how the utilities can apply activated carbon to choose that. The addressable market is well over 150,000 tons per year. It's not easy to put 4 parts per trillion into perspective. The EPA has had drinking water standards in the US now for several decades, established by what we call the Clean Water Act. Those particular guidelines are in the part per million range. And here, for this particular family of compounds, the goal is to go all the way down to parts per trillion. So considerably lower removal is the target, and therefore those who have been not using GAC will be using it. Those who have been using it will be using it more. So this is expected to be significant growth, not only in North America, but throughout the world. As I mentioned, activated carbon pellets offer benefits. They're harder, meaning that there's less abrasion during their use. And that less abrasion means that the whole entire water treatment plant will work more effectively. They also offer lower pressure drop. One of the most expensive components of producing water is electricity. Massive amount of pumping power that's required to push the water from the reservoir, from the river to the homes. But most of that power drain is the water treatment plant itself. And pellets offers a significant advantage here. We've already been working very closely with the US EPA, as well as a number of water treatment plants who are ready to start demonstrating the performance of the product. I think that it's a weekly basis now, if not several times per week, where we're getting contacted by end users wanting to test product, purchase product, and get into the market space. As we've stated before, presently there are no US manufacturers of pellets, and therefore this gives us a competitive advantage. Next slide. So now we're going to walk through some of the other water-related technologies that we've been working on, and then go ahead and wrap up with some research activities that may be ongoing now for several months. And Regina is going to walk us through this last phase of the presentation.
Yeah, fantastic. Next slide, please. So as David mentioned, one of the things that we really focus on within our technical team and our R&D team is not only looking at technologies from the perspective of new development or patented technologies, but rather how can we make a significant impact in not only from a health perspective, but also from an environmental perspective. And as many of you may be aware of, the harmful algae blooms and nutrient excess in our waterways is not only a Florida problem. We sit here in the state of Florida, and obviously the United States has significant eutrophication and excess nutrients discharge through agriculture and production of several productions, but we see this across the entire world. So this is not just a regional problem, but rather a global piece. We've looked at some of these technologies and creating them from research, development to full commercialization. And the next couple of slides will be those that are not fully in the commercialization stage yet, rather whether it's an EPA regulation piece or a product, is the product ready yet? So we look at that from all of those different stages in our team. This phosphorus reduction technology was built on the back end of our pellet with biochar, and we were able to do that nicely from green technology using material that's charred on its way to activated carbon, and using some of our pelletization technology as well, but rather to be used in the liquid phase, in semi-liquid phase stages, where we're looking to remove phosphorus and nitrogen as these nutrients build up in these natural environments. We were fortunate enough to partner with some of these teams here in Florida, and this is one where we have received significant funding from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection here these past 2-3 years that we've been working with this. And really the main goal has been to remove phosphorus in milligrams per liter and parts per million from waterways to prevent additional eutrophication, as that will continue to cause death of the estuaries and the ocean as well. Here in the state of Florida, we are very familiar with what we call red tide, where it's basically the ocean turning red and basically from death of fish and marine life, because the eutrophication is an excess growth of algae, which causes the bottom of the ocean to not see the light or to have any oxygen, all of the oxygen being depleted. So we see the death of these various aquifers. So the HydroStore technology, hydration restoration, is really intended to be deployed by wastewater facilities and municipalities to treat the nutrient discharge at the source before it goes into these water bodies. Next slide, please. Some of the interesting things that we have done is partner with some facilities here in the state of Florida that have done large-scale operations. We've been working with about 1 million gallon per day flow streams to be able to treat at a larger scale. And as you can see in this very small picture, that black line that's covering those pipes, those are all pellets. These are 4 millimeter Carbonxt pellets that have been added to this ditch, which will have an upflow and downflow treatment of water as the water comes into the rest of that liquid stream. The filter media located in these beds is then passed through at various residence times to remove and absorb phosphorus. The technology itself was paired with both chemical and physical adsorption. So the change of phosphorus binds to the surface of the activated carbon and can then be potentially reused on the back end as a slow reused fertilizer. So with the EPA, specifically here in Florida and other states, starting to drive some of this legislative process, some of the water utilities are starting to take preemptive measures, and that's what's really facilitated some of the current work and the future work with this latest award funding that will treat about 8 million gallons of water. We are now creating this on a modular scale to be able to have a HydroStore mobile unit where we can have reactors and leading to more pilot testing and continuation of these demonstrations that we're seeing here in the state of Florida and the East and West Coast. The really neat thing about this technology is that we're treating the eutrophication at the source before it becomes that perspective, and then separately what that has done is it has allowed us to play further in this field and expand our technologies into what some will call our red tide grant opportunity, which is a secondary grant that was awarded to treat the red tide at the source and inactivate the cyanotoxins as well there. The next slide goes into detail a little bit about some of the other projects that we have been leading, specifically as it relates to tangible markets in the future, specifically carbon materials for batteries. We know that that is a big thing for us. Some of those of us that drive electric vehicles, and obviously the electric community is continuing to grow, and having replacement and availability for batteries will be important. Pellets for more REACT system. Here in the United States, there aren't any additional REACT system, but there are some across the Asian, Pacific, area where we can provide additional superior pellets to or optimized pellets for some of these applications, where we have spent several years very much studying and really understanding the adsorption and desorption of NOx, SOx, and mercury. And we have a lot of experience and expertise here. The last project that is taking off, still in the developmental stage, but gaining more traction with respect to our research, has been decarbonization in the reduction of CO2 in the steel manufacturing area. And that's really more looking at some of these green materials, where we're starting with wood-based and less reliant on coal-based products, but rather wood-based products that our team has some really good experience in, and leveraging that pelletization and expertise and technology into some of these new opportunities and new areas.
Thanks,
So I guess
guys.
now okay.
We're all ready for some questions.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Look, we have had a couple of questions come through, and I'd like to address the first one to David, if I can. David, can you just talk us through what's happening with pricing in the broader activated carbon market?
Sure, Alex. We're seeing significant increases over the past year. The powdered activated carbon market pricing is moving up noticeably. However, the granular activated carbon market for liquid phase applications is really experiencing growth that we've not seen, historically. So, for example, if we look at a standard product that was being used in most water treatment plants 6 to 8 months ago, we might be seeing something in the $1.35 per pound range. Now we're seeing similar pricing, similar pricing for similar products north of $1.75, even starting to surpass $2 per pound. The same thing is happening on the pellets, where we're seeing a substantial increase in pricing. Some of the drivers for this would be just global demand. Certainly, I think the world has learned that if we're going to be using products like this for the protection of human health, that domestically produced products are being favored compared to imports. Shipping delays, shipping lanes, everything to do with the pandemic. While some of this will come back to somewhat normal, we're still seeing the drive towards more domestically used products, as well as focusing on the performance of these products, and hence the pricing increasing quite substantially.
Thanks, David. So which market segment is more competitive, air phase or liquid phase?
I would say as we look, I'll answer this particular question as we look forward, and we see that we'll be able to enter the liquid phase market relatively straightforward for a number of reasons. One is that the ability for one to go into the air phase market, there's less manufacturing hurdles, and therefore there have been a number of companies that were born just to meet air phase regulations over the past 10 years. There are no pellet manufacturers in the US, and really the primary and only direct competitor for the liquid phase opportunity is Calgon. In the early slide with the introductions, I really emphasized the background and the experience with the water treatment plants. And that's because we also have decades now of relationships with the end users as well as the consulting firms. So these consulting firms are really important in the dynamic strategy because they can provide introductions to the end users, they help with trials, and they help really bring all of this to a conclusion. And so having the relationships with these national firms as well as the end users in place, we view this as an easier market compared to the air phase.
Thanks, David. Regina, I'll address this next one to you if I can. Do you think liquid phase demand will grow faster than air phase demand going forward?
I think going forward, we see that the PFAS market will definitely require a liquid phase solution. So assuming we're very confident that the GAC and pellet side will be one of the main, if not the best available technology for PFAS and PFOS removal. So that will be a pretty significant driver there. From an air perspective, in terms of growth, outside of the mercury technology that was implemented for mercury removal technology and regulatory requirements for coal-fired power plants, I personally, and this could be something that David, you can comment a little bit more on, I personally don't see that market growing much more from that perspective. I think there's some power plants that will be shutting down, and therefore that may be a little bit slower to pick back up. An area where there may be some air pollution or air phase applications will be on volatile organic compounds, VOCs, and then really understanding any other pollutant that is emerging, and whether that's in the vapor phase or in the liquid phase. Something that we're taught in school is that there's no destruction of any of these constituents. It's just we're putting it at a different phase. So we're taking it from the air phase, from the solid phase to the water phase to the liquid phase to the gas phase, and it's a continued movement of these constituents because we're not destroying them. So once these materials do go into a landfill, for example, it's really looking at the full life cycle assessment of them from that perspective. So I'm hoping that kind of answered that question from a market perspective in terms of regulations.
Yeah, I'll just add maybe a little bit to it, and I appreciate Warren photoshopping my photo in the webinar because it doesn't show any gray hair, of which I have almost all gray and very little black. So, I mean, I've been in this market now for 25 plus years, and there's always significant growth in activated carbon. The world's population is increasing. The number of applications continue to increase. However, this liquid phase market surrounding these forever chemicals, the PFOA and PFAS, is not something I think that any of us in this space have seen over the past 20 to 30 years. It's a substantial game changer in the activated carbon industry, and water utilities are already scrambling quite significantly, trying to understand what products are available, when can they start testing, and looking at their overall strategies to make sure that they can meet this legislation that's the EPA has put out.
Thanks, David. Now I'll address this one to you as well, if I can. Now, there's just been a question that's come through on the red tide opportunity. You received a couple of R&D grants for using activated carbon to treat these algae blooms. How far away are you from taking this from R&D to commercialization?
Yeah, thanks for the question. to put a specific timeline on it is probably a function of, a variety of factors. I think one is we have an existing, pilot that's up and operating now for quite some time, generating, significant data. And this particular pilot was done in a unique way, really for proof of concept. We wouldn't envision commercializing it the same way, but rather using, vessels or carbon fiber containers that you might be familiar with, like for pool filters. And therefore, it's being able to have sufficient capital to build these systems and to get them, into some demonstration purposes. So I think one of the hurdles here that we need to overcome is we have a certain amount of capital resources, and where do we apply it? So if we had more capital resources, we could go faster. Nutrients are a significant problem, and they cause tremendous impairment to waterways. They have known toxin formation and significant negative ramifications to fisheries. So for example, in Florida, there's a significant amount of tourism that's generated. So we know the customer base is there. We know that the Florida legislation is there. We know that the what we call the Department of Environmental Protection is supportive. So I think it's this balance of us being able to build these systems, get them into the customer's hands, to prove it, and then to be able to get this more widespread, implemented across the state, and then expand from there.
Thanks, David. So, Regina, what's the size of the market opportunity here compared to where you have commercial contracts today with power plants?
Specifically for the nutrient side?
I think the question seems pretty generic in terms of the size of the market opportunity. So you can be as specific or as general as you like, I think.
Yeah, so if we focus on, for example, PFAS and PFOS as compared to coal-fired power plants, here we're talking much, much larger. When we first started looking at coal-fired power plants, we were, I think, looking at 700 plants in the United States that needed technology. Here we're talking about every state having at least 20 to 30 water treatment plants that will have to look at treating, and 20 to 30 is probably an underestimation, but it's a pretty significant water treatment market compared to a coal-fired power plant market. A big place where we have a significant opportunity is in some of these DOD areas where there's military, Air Force grounds where they need to have treatment of PFOS and PFAS because of their storage tanks that need to be treated. So I would say it's much larger than the coal-fired power plant market. I would say it's probably larger as well for the nutrient side, especially from the perspective that nutrients and eutrophication, especially in agricultural-based areas, use a lot of nutrient, nitrogen, and phosphorus for land application, which then has a pretty significant runoff that needs to be treated. I would say that the PFOS market at this time, based on regulatory, is probably going to be larger than the nutrient market here in the United States because of the strict regulation, because of the toxicity of PFOS and the health impact to humans versus to the environment and to wildlife like the nutrients would have.
Thanks, Regina. Now, could you just talk us through the specific market opportunity for red tide in that context?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, the HydroStore product looks at red tide or eutrophication. So here in the state of Florida, red tide is the eutrophication that comes from the Gulf. There's also blue-green algae, which is the type of algae that gets developed due to eutrophication. HydroStore looks at removing the excess nutrient from the source. We've also looked at prevention or actual inactivation of red tides, so these harmful algal blooms that have these Karenia brevis cysts that end up being toxic as well when they do break down. So we have pre-treatment of the nutrients themselves at the source, and then that deactivation piece with the red tide. So that nutrient, so what we're calling the nutrient market, is probably pretty large. I think it's just going to be very much regulatory driven. And then the water treatment plants, because this is a new technology, they will want reaffirmation and confidence that that this technology works and that is robust enough to implement to their water treatment side, which is the main reason why we've gone forward with this new grant and procured some of that more modular system that David was talking about, so that we can get more pilot-driven data and be able to showcase some of that performance and almost feedback from previous clients that have tested it. So it's more of they need that proof, whereby on the other hand, the PFOS market, it's very proven that granular and pelletized activated carbon is the right solution, and it's commercially accepted.
Thanks, Regina. Now, how will you approach the sales function in getting Kentucky production into the market?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. There will be the primary goal here is going to be direct to customer. So while it'll be helpful to have a couple of salespersons, but almost as some of the basic account management, we're already in pretty significant discussions and relationships with a lot of different water utilities because of our historical representation as the chairpersons for the American Water Works Standards Committee. So, for example, this morning we spent about an hour on the phone with 6 water utilities who are presently trying to figure out the GAC, the granular activated carbon demand or pellet demand for the forever chemicals. And so that sales channel is already open. We've previously consulted for the American Water Works Company. They're the largest water purveyor in the United States. They own and operate water treatment plants in 23 states. So here I think we've got some good relationships. In addition, we will rely on the relationships with the consulting firms. And here, the consulting firms, they're not distributors, so they're not looking to take a cut. They're being hired by the end user, the water treatment plant, to find solutions. So they're getting paid for their advice. They're getting paid to help them with the overall solution, the implementation, et cetera. And then they work with the various carbon manufacturers to try to get their products in the queue for testing and the like. So our belief is that the demand is high enough, the relationships are strong enough that we can go to market with a limited sales force. We'll evaluate and then adjust from there as necessary.
Thanks, David. Now, Warren, if I could just get you on mic, I might ask these. We only have a couple of questions to go, and I thought I might address these ones to you. Warren, when do you expect HydroStore to move to commercial demand?
I think Regina would be better to answer that one, Alex, but I would still think that we, as you saw from the slides and heard from Regina, we're still going through that commercialization phase and building the pilot systems test that out. So I would think it's a good 18 months away. But Regina, do you want to give a more specific answer?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good assessment, Warren. I think here the fact that we have this, I think the fact that we have support from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection will be a really nice stamp of approval to our project, the way that it's been funded right now, and I think that's going to continue to move forward. I think here I'll relay back to David's comment in terms of, as we make and put more manpower and financial capital onto the HydroStore, that will move faster because then we'll have more ability to commercialize it quicker and get some more sales on that. But I do think it's a little bit of timing from a market. Is the market fully ready to take on large orders? And is our team ready to go approach some of these opportunities?
Thanks, Regina. And David, I'll address the final question to you if I can. Can you just talk us through the market opportunity or the size of the market opportunity for the battery and steel manufacturing solutions that you're developing?
Yeah, I'll start with the steel manufacturing one. This one is quite substantial. Any given steel manufacturer will be looking at using tens of thousands of tons of material per year. Their strategy basically is just to replace a portion of their fuel, specifically their pet coke, with a wood-based product. And as you can appreciate, when they're using tens of thousands of tons of pet coke, it's essentially a one-to-one transfer. They'll still use tens and tens of thousands of wood-based materials. However, it has a lower CO2 footprint and therefore is more beneficial. The battery market is not one where we're particularly focused on the size of the market, albeit it's one that is already in the thousands of tons and likely to grow as we certainly see batteries increasing. However, this is one that we would like to get to appreciable, margins. In other words, powdered activated carbon, our first primary, product, as much as all the carbon manufacturers would agree, it's a very technical product. The end industry power plants somewhat treat it as a commodity. It's something they have to use, but they don't necessarily see a benefit. We're swinging the spectrum here to a market opportunity where a few percent performance could then translate into much, higher margins. So whereas powdered activated carbon today might be selling for 80 cents per pound, carbons in this market are selling for more than $5 per pound. We want to maintain those low manufacturing costs. We want to move to a much bigger margin opportunity.
Fantastic, David. Look, that's all the time we have today. Thank you all for joining me. I'd also like to thank Warren, David, and Regina for their presence and also presenting and taking the time to answer some questions. Now, as I mentioned before, a recording of the webinar will be on Carbonxt website and social media platforms later today. Warren, you introed us at the start. Do you have anything to say to leave with us before we finalise the webinar today?
Not particularly, Alex, but just thank everybody for their time and. We did this to try and get people to see the depth of what we're doing in Carbonxt, and we're very proud of the achievements the team have been able to demonstrate today. Thank everyone for their support. Once again, we're very keen to get the Kentucky deal done. We will capitalise now for that, and we look forward to making announcements to that end very shortly.
Fantastic. Well, that wraps it up for us here. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.